I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. We did. We were offline for most of it. Well, on our phones probably, but not doing Raging Moderates content. But the wait is over. We're back. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and hang with us.
Welcome to Raging Moderates. I'm Scott Galloway.
And I'm Jessica Tarlov.
The White House is under mounting pressure to explain a deadly September 2nd strike in the Caribbean, now at the center of a potential war crimes investigation. New reporting shows Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did authorize a lethal attack on a suspected drug smuggling boat, but 5 U.S. officials say his order didn't explicitly cover what to do if survivors remained after the first missile hit. What happened next is what's triggering bipartisan alarm. Admiral Frank Bradley ordered multiple follow-up strikes that killed the survivors and sank the boat. The Pentagon, the White House, and Hegseth all offering conflicting accounts of who gave what order and why. Meanwhile, Congress is opening full investigations into whether the administration is treating drug smuggling as an armed conflict to justify lethal force that would otherwise be illegal. Jess, based on what we know, does Hegseth's vague directive shield him or expose him to charges that he greenlit an unlawful kill operation?
I think how he's behaving is a pretty clear indication that he does not feel shielded from anything. Because, I mean, this story in the course of 48 hours went from the Washington Post is completely lying. They were the ones with the first scoop on this that he said, kill them all, to posting Franklin the Turtle, you know, this cartoon thing that he did where he's like taking out narco-terrorists, to actually it did happen. You had Caroline Leavitt reading a lawyered up statement in the press briefing, moving that full responsibility onto this Admiral Bradley, who was promoted, I think, about a month ago. And this is all in the wake of General Halsey, who was the guy in charge of Southern Command, who quit the same day that this order was apparently put out. So he knows he's in trouble, and he's behaving as such, which I guess is a good thing. Like, maybe they'll be more careful for the next 20 minutes or something like that. But it seems like it's firmly in war crime territory, though we're not technically in a war with Venezuela, so I don't know what terms we should use, but it's a violation of what everybody has read in the DOD manual. I'll be very curious to hear if those 6 Democrats that made the video that we've been talking about, where it says you should not comply with illegal orders, knew about the behind the scenes on this particular strike and had that in mind, because they had said in other interviews that junior officers have been reaching out saying that they're conflicted or that they're not sure of what they should be doing, and they feel like they could be put in compromising positions. So I wonder if there is a direct connection between these two things. But I think Hegseth and kind of everyone in that apparatus knows that, I mean, I want to say that they know that they're fucked, but then again, nothing has actually ever happened to this administration. And I'm glad that the outrage is bipartisan, and you know, Wicker is as mad as any Democrat out there. But they all voted for the guy anyway. And I feel as though I got a mea culpa a little bit. I didn't say that Pete Hegseth was qualified for this job, but when we talked about it during the vetting process, I said, you know, like, he served with distinction and the troops love him, et cetera. And I feel like a bit of a dum-dum. So I'm owning the dum-dumness of that, and I wish I could take it back, but the tape will exist forever.
Well, you know him, right? I mean,
yeah, I do, which complicates
he's probably
everything.
I find at Fox, everyone I meet there is lovely and nice, and you know, and then you hear them. I really enjoyed being on Megyn Kelly's podcast, and then when I listened to her, I'm like, okay, this individual's crazy.
She is a little too excited about these boat strikes, to say about the difference between a 15-year-old and a 8-year-old girl for Epstein, and the boat strikes get her a little hot. Do you think it's a war crime? Do you think anyone's going to actually get in trouble?
So one of the reasons in World War II, when Americans were captured by Germans, they were actually treated under the Geneva Conventions. They were fed, they were clothed, they got medical treatment. The Japanese did not treat American POWs as well. And the reason they did that is that they wanted captured German soldiers to be treated, you know, somewhat equitably. You are supposed to offer quarter to an enemy that has essentially been no longer a threat. So the issue here that feels like a war crime is that you bomb a boat. First off, these are extrajudicial killings that have not been approved by Congress. So right there, they're kind of suspect, especially when you look at the fact that this is all a false flag of fentanyl. Venezuela does not have fentanyl, and these, quote unquote, the distribution or transportation system of these boats, any preliminary research shows these boats would need to make 20 refueling stops to get to Miami. So the whole thing has a cloud of like, okay, here's America overstepping its boundaries in an attempt to either distract from Epstein or have some sort of performative masculinity. Where it gets really ugly, and I think could actually qualify as a war crime, is the second strike. And that is, you are not supposed to harm enemy combatants when they no longer pose a threat to you. And people in the water no longer pose a threat. And it appears as if the worm has turned, that, you know, people who used to fall in line for Trump, and even Trump is sounding like he might throw Hegseth under the bus. And a military tribunal is not a good look. In addition, the timing couldn't have been worse, because as they come out and accuse 6 congresspeople and senators of sedition when they suggest you have an obligation to disobey unlawful orders, which is redundant. Of course you have an obligation to disobey unlawful orders. I don't see what the controversy is there. And then the guy goes out and, according to the Washington Post, orders a second strike against, quote unquote, even suspect as being enemy combatants. But when they are clearly no threat, that's basically, by most tribunal standards, by most, my understanding is what they teach in terms of rules of engagement at West Point or in Annapolis, this constitutes a war crime. And more than anything, unfortunately, it's not about the legal triggering of whether it's a war crime or not. It's about political momentum. And that is whether these MAGA individuals and the president himself turn on the secretary. But the net of this over the long term, and why so much of what Trump is doing is so damaging over the long term, is that our servicemen and servicewomen are in more danger when they enter into combat and they find themselves, as you do in war, in positions where they have been defeated kinetically and militarily, but survive the combat. We then give license to our enemies to wholesale murder our troops. So there's this, even in war, there are rules. We decided after World War I not to use poisonous gas attacks against each other. And we all agreed, all right, we're going to find other ways to kill each other. There is a generally accepted rules across the largest nations with the largest armies that we don't use lasers to blind enemy combatants. There's now technology where you can send out a light or a ray that would blind everyone on the field. We have all agreed not to use those. So there are rules here. But again, I think this is more interesting from, has the worm actually turned? Do you think the momentum has turned against Hegseth, and that this might be kind of, this might be the first high-profile firing of the Trump administration?
No, I really think that that Trump has dug in about Pete Hegseth. And we were even discussing this last week, the fact that Hegseth was at home while the Army Secretary Dan Driscoll was in the UAE negotiating the Russia-Ukraine peace talks, and what that symbolized, because there was talk back at Signalgate many moons ago, right, that Dan Driscoll would be the guy that should replace Hegseth if he did lose the post as Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, which I'm supposed to say. But Donald Trump really likes Pete Hegseth a lot, and he takes all of this very personally. He got to handpick his cabinet. He really lobbied everybody to make sure that he got the votes that he needed for this key personnel. And I think he's going to go to the mats for them, barring the fact that maybe the Senate and the House finds conclusively with Republicans and Democrats in agreement that this was a violation of the Geneva Conventions and our own war manual. And even then, I don't know if you would try to run out the clock in some way to ensure that Pete could stay. But, you know, we have been talking about the impact of social media and how important it is to Trump that he has people who are good on TV. And I feel like there is no one who would benefit more from having his phone taken away at this particular moment than Pete Hegseth. You know, the tweeting through it, even when you're going to have to change your story, and the level of defiance that people in this orbit show, even when they're completely wrong. and they can't even like take a beat, right? You know what that's like, where you get something wrong and hopefully you admit it. Most of the time I try to, and then you take a few minutes, right? Like offline or away from puffing up your chest and making yourself the centerpiece of the show to take stock of what happened. And that kind of personal gauge just doesn't exist in these people. And like Pete Hegseth has, I don't know if you saw this, but there's a chapter in his book literally called More Lethality, Less Lawyers.
Yeah, that means more war crime.
Right. Exactly. And when he was on stage in front of those generals, when Trump got up there too and said, you're going to have to help us out in the liberal cities, Pete Hegseth was talking about this, that we are going to do more lethality. And it's been interesting to see how little defenders of the president or Pete Hegseth, the administration, whatever you want to call it, want to engage in the details of this story. I'm separating this from the folks on the Hill because they actually seem pretty interested, like Mike Turner, a Republican, Roger Wicker, who I already mentioned on the Senate side. But people are just calling it like Venezuelan boat hoax and then just moving on, right? Like we'll just put this in the pile of things with the Russia collusion hoax and Charlottesville and whatever, and we'll add it to the annals of all the ways that they tried to get Donald Trump. And I would hope, well, A, that they would stop doing that, but that's not going to happen. And then B, that there would be something different about this, that there would be a set of rules or ways to behave that were a little bit different than the same bullshit as like, I'm going to go on TV or I'm going to be tweeting about this. I do think that there's an interesting angle to it. Not only the pardoning of the former Honduran president who just got out of jail this morning. The guy was at 5,000 kilos of cocaine that he's trafficked into the U.S. So he gets a pardon because he's friends with Roger Stone. But the media aspect of it, because this story is being reported during a period where the mainstream media reporters, like the Washington Post, New York Times, et cetera, have lost their desks in the Pentagon. So the Pentagon is stocked right now with right-wing losers that all parrot the administration's talking points. And the guys and gals that are actually getting this story are on the outside, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, just to review right now what it appears, whether this qualifies as a war crime or not, legal experts pretty much universally agree that firing on people who are shipwrecked, incapacitated, or otherwise no longer posing a threat is prohibited under the laws of armed conflict and international humanitarian law. What we have here is referred to as a double tap strike, and that's the initial attack. And then a follow-up on survivors is especially controversial and could constitute a war crime if survivors were not a continuing threat. What's interesting here is that we have, as you referenced, lawmakers from both parties, along with former military lawyers, experts, have raised serious concerns calling for investigations. And to me, you know, the legal wrangling will be interesting, but this does feel like, and I said this around MTG, this does feel, and I keep looking for the turning point, and I keep finding out, no, we're barreling down this road towards whatever this is, autocracy, oligarchy, fascism, pick your word. This does feel like more people are risking the wrath of Khan being Trump, because they just find this unacceptable. And also, I want to back up. I like the idea of getting Maduro out of power, taking advantage of the fact that Russia's weak right now. China, I don't think can fight a proxy war with Venezuela, and securing additional energy resources for the United States. I love the idea of installing, I think when Maduro basically steals an election, I like the idea of covert operations to overthrow his government. And if you want to call that imperialism, fine. And I think that securing that energy flow is strategically a very smart move for the U.S. But diminishing our brand globally by committing war crimes, that puts our men and women in uniform in danger, reduces our moral authority, reduces the power of our soft and our hard power. It's just, you know, I thought what Senator Kelly said was pretty apt. We have what feels like a child jumping up and down on stage, beating his chest, saying, you know, I'm the strongest kid on the playground, and all this like bullshit performative masculinity. Yeah, they're bombing supposed drug traffickers / fishermen and killing them in the water, but don't want to continue to arm Ukraine.
Well, and they tell on themselves that they don't bring any of these people in for prosecution. They say that they know exactly who they are, and this is a well thought out plan, and they're just returning everybody who did survive or shooting the two that are hanging on to the side of the boat, which would indicate to me that they don't actually know who these people are.
They don't want to know who they are.
Right.
They don't want to find out that, it's some 65-year-old dude who's been feeding his family by fishing mackerel off the Venezuelan coast and is not, in fact, is not transferring or transporting fentanyl. They don't want to know.
Well, they know it's not fentanyl, and then they're like, they just make you defend it. Oh, you think cocaine is good? No, I don't think cocaine is good, but I don't think that cocaine is killing people the way that fentanyl is killing them. The whole predicate for the operation is BS and is being exposed. But they're just YOLOing their way through all of this. And, I've tried my best to, think outside the box of, like how this could be a good thing. And you just said that you would be in favor of some form of regime change for Venezuela. That surprised me that you feel that way. Most people are like, we learned our lesson about this and it doesn't usually go well. So yeah, maybe that's the case, but they're making no argument to the American people about what they're doing. They're just lying to us constantly and waiting for drips and drabs to get out there and then gaslighting us.
Yeah, it's we'll see if this is a turning point. If nothing improper happened, again, it's like Trump with the Epstein files. Hegseth now looks like my dog Leia when she's peed somewhere but can't remember where, and she's just walking around the house looking guilty. That's Secretary Hegseth right now. But again, and just going back, I don't believe we should have boots on the ground, but I think there's a really solid argument for limited airstrikes that, in coordination with covert operations on the ground, overthrow Maduro and put in an American-friendly government. And I think we have at least some air cover to do that because Maduro is an illegitimate leader who basically lost the election and then seized it by power. I also think we have real strategic interests with Venezuela, again, going back to energy supply. Anyways, any closing words here, Jess? Any predictions about what will happen in the next week or two?
I think this is going to be the main story for several weeks. They'll try to get it off the front page, but I think it's too big.
There you go. We'll leave it there. Jess, we'll be back with a full episode tomorrow covering the latest on Trump, the viral conversation on the new poverty line, and Oxford Dictionary's word of the year. Make sure you subscribe. Speak to you tomorrow.
Talk to you tomorrow.